If you're watching this video, chances are you want to know how to replace the upper control arms on your 4th generation, aka 2003 to 2009 Toyota 4Runner. Lucky for you, we'll be doing just that. So that's the old one, it's the new one. Just a quick little FYI about the parts or the tools you're going to need. Pliers, wouldn't hurt, 19mm closed end wrench, ratchet, trim removal tool if you have, if not, just use a screwdriver. Light wouldn't hurt, penetrating oil definitely have, sledgehammer definitely have, pair of pliers, recommend, needle nose would work fine. Torque wrench, for sure. Impact if you have, fantastic. If not, breaker bar. So sockets, I got 21, 19, 18, 13, and 12. Those are the main ones you're going to need. Having a small 12 and 10 would help. Swivel 19, 10, 12, and yeah, would also help. If you don't have them, you don't have them. Not the end of the world. And also the 6mm hex socket for the sway bar links you'll see. May or may not need it, but recommend it just in case if it applies to you. So for the rear wheels, don't forget your wheel chocks. One in front of each rear wheel, and set the parking brake. Alright, so I'm at the front driver's side of the vehicle. Just have to lift or jack up the front of the vehicle on both sides. Now luckily this is a full framed vehicle, so you could jack it up and use the jack stands anywhere in the frame itself. A lot of space. So I find it easiest to put the jack over here and the jack stands right over here. Alright, so I got the jack stand in place. As you can tell, making pretty good contact on both sides. You can remove the jack stand, the floor jack. Just gonna put the safety collar in. Before you climb out of the vehicle, look at the jack up the other side, of course, and just give it a look to make sure it's making good contact. Then you're good to go. Once both sides are in, continue forward. Then just push on the car, little lateral force. Give it a nice knock. Nothing much, just a little something to make sure it's steady. Alright, so once the car is jacked up, I'm gonna open the hood. Alright, so now I'm at the driver's side wheel. Got a 21mm socket. I do have an impact wrench if you don't use a breaker bar or ratchet, whatever you need, but makes it much easier. Now I'm on the passenger side, just going to repeat the same thing, 21mm socket. So after you sprayed that, we're just going to remove the sway bar link from the knuckle, and this is on the driver's side, which is what I'm going to show you for most of this. The passenger side is exactly the same. So I'm just going to use an 18mm socket just to remove this nut. If that nut doesn't work or the nut spins with the threaded section, you can insert a 6mm hex key into here and then put a wrench on here. The hex key will hold the stud in place and the wrench will turn the nut. See, if you saw that, this was rotating too. So what I did was I kind of just held this against the threaded section. Now I'm going to take this out. So now once you do this on both sides, the sway bar is disconnected from both ends. Alright, so after the car is jacked up, I did add a second pair of supporting jack stands, not necessarily touching the car completely, just enough, just in case the first one's failed, but double safety. Anyways, we're going to do the passenger side, driver's side, exactly the same, and I'll tell you one little tip later on about the driver's side. So anyways, let's start. So I'm in the middle of replacing my rack and pinion, and it is currently removed, so there's no sway bar links or rack and pinion, or aka, you know, outer tie rods, inner tie rods, which is why there's a bunch of space here. Not necessary whatsoever for taking this upper control arm off at all. Just FYI, I'm in the middle of doing both at the same time, so that's why some things are missing. But again, not necessary to do this. Only thing you have to take out to replace the upper control arm is to remove the sway bar link from the knuckle. That's it. And then the sway bar and the sway bar link could just hang right here. Nothing else has to come off for that. Alright, so first up, we got to remove both splash shields, front one, the rear one. I have one of these trim removal tools. If you don't, screwdriver works fine. And I am replacing the splash shield, so I don't care what happens to it, nor the connectors, because I'm also replacing them. Alright, so now we have access to everything. This is the perfect time to use penetrant spray and spray almost every single bolt you're going to be taking off. So let's go for a little ride. So, bolts you're definitely going to be taking off. This one. This one. This one, and this one. Some bolts you may consider taking off. And I believe that was it. Yeah. Oh, one more. No, I'm sorry, this one you're keeping on. It's the one behind it you're taking off. And the bolt is right there. That's the one, not this one. You'll see. Just gonna let that soak in for a minute or two. All right, let's see. So, gotta remove this bolt. There we go. This bolt right here. This bolt holds the ABS wire bracket to the upper control arm. That is a 10mm socket. All these bolts I would highly recommend after you take them off, just clean them, wire wheel brush, something like that. Less chances of breaking. Then I would recommend removing this one. This is a 12mm socket or head. I do have a swivel attachment. You could just use a straight one. Also, when you use an impact wrench, chances of it strip of the head snapping off are less likely than if you were to just use the wrench itself. But if you don't have one, use what you got. Just be careful. This is why I would recommend cleaning them. I wouldn't want to put that back in the car, not like that condition. Got another 10mm bolt right here. This 10mm bolt and this 10mm bolt up here. Can't see it up here. The one we just took off before, those are the same. Yeah, so that's, now this is free. There is a little push-in connector right here. Just use your fingers and it pops out. You can see it from this side. Where are we? Right here. There's my finger. Oh, there. Just squeeze the tabs and it pushes out the other side. Just like that. Probably couldn't see it, I was blocking it. But that's it, it just pushes in and out. So now, this wire, free to move, awesome. So pretty sure my camera was off for that when I took this out. So this right here, taking this bolt out is helpful because it just enables some more wiggle room with the brake lines. Now this is a stainless steel bolt I put in last year. It's a 13 millimeter for you, but if you have the original, it should be a 12 millimeter. And I just used a socket with the wrench. My impact didn't fit in there. But anyways, take that off. Love those stainless steel bolts. And then this comes off, and this was also replaced, so it's not rusted. Same with the brake lines, so they're not as bad. They're actually relatively new. Yours might be a little bit more rusted, and if you're afraid to take this off, you could get a wrench on here. You could even try a socket, but just be careful, you don't want to break the lines. Next up, got to remove the cotter pin from the nut. Just get some pliers and pull that out. Oh, there we go. So that came off. Now, that's a 19 millimeter socket. Get the impact. So now for the castle nut, make sure it's in reverse and not tightening. Oh, I forgot I used the spoiler. Hey, Jim. My impact is a little too beefy to fit in here with the normal straight socket, so I got my wobble adapter on. All right, here we go. Now, what you want to do is you want to put this castle nut back on a couple threads. You'll see why. That should be good. Take a hammer, hit the knuckle. That will free the studs from the knuckle. Well, the stud of the upper control arm. Also, FYI, when I did this on the driver's side, being that I have the rack and pinion out, aka there's no outer tie rod connected to the knuckle and no sway bar link, this thing is pretty free to move. So I do have a jack stand just under the bottom, just in case. And be careful, because it moves, at least in my case. In your case, if you still have the sway bar, if you have the outer tie rod connected, it may not move as much, which would be awesome for you. There we go, see? Separated. And if you didn't want to do that, if you have like a pickle fork, you could just put that in here and hammer it in and separate it, but that works fine. So now we have to use a pry bar to push down on this to remove the castle nut, because there's a lot of pressure trying to go in opposite directions. So I have my pry bar. See that? And I'm just going to take that off. That's the castle nut. Hopefully you're focused for this. So now I'm going to let that up. So right now, my knuckle is pretty free to move. And that's because I have no outer tie rod connected. So I just got to be careful with the wires. And again, taking all these wires, all the bolts out, really allows you to move this around a little bit. So I just got these hooks I use when I do my brake pads. Just gonna put them in some places. Should you have to do this? I would believe not if you have the outer tie rods attached, but I do. Better view. Yeah, so you have a nut on this side, and then the bolt head over here. So I have a 19mm wrench. Just gonna hold this side. And just so you get a better view, right here, that bolt. And I'm gonna take my socket and put it on that nut. $19mm for both sides. And this is gonna drop down, FYI, because it's free, just the bolt sitting in place. Anyways, it's the nut. Just keep note of the orientation of these washers. You got the side that bulges out like a bump going inwards. Same over here if you can see that. The bulge is going towards the control arm. It's dipped in on the nut side. And I'll show you when we put it on. Anyways, yeah, see the difference? Bulge, no bulge. This raised surface goes towards the inside of the control arm, like clamping together almost. Now, if it's not seized in there, this bolt should just slide through. Oh yeah, no, it's good. It moved. See, it wiggled back and forth. That means it's not seized. You do not have to cut it off. Otherwise you would. And I'll be cutting off my low control arm, so I'd rather not cut 2 bolts today. Anyways, just gonna slide it off. Now, the bolt's probably gonna get caught on a couple things. The first thing is, zoom in. Right there. The bolt gets caught on this edge. Just kind of wiggle it away. Oh, that washer. Yeah. Keep the washer over here. It won't move past. There we go. So, could also just use some pliers. And just like keep wiggling it out. Like I'm twisting and I'm pulling out at the same time. And that washer is really on there. All right, so when you're trying to pass the bolt through on the passenger side, it kind of gets stuck on this line right here. So just be careful and put a little pressure on the line, pulling it away from the side. There looks like there's enough room to clear it. And then you're gonna keep pulling it, and we'll go from there. Whoever designed these cars, I gotta give it to them. So the bolt, again, gotta finesse it. It gets caught on wires over here, but there's enough room to move the bracket just a couple millimeters to squeeze that bolt head through. Didn't have to disassemble a thing. And so the bolt comes out all the way, and you can pull it to the hole, but I just have to support the upper control arm. So I just have my pry bar in here. That way this thing doesn't just completely drop down, because the bolt is basically out. I'm gonna pull it out a little bit more, and then this thing should be free. Like this. Control arm is free, that comes out. The bolt, if you're reusing the bolt, I mean, you could keep it right there. You could take it out and clean it, I'd recommend it. I have a new one, so I'm gonna take it out anyway. All Alright, so the bolt, just going to pass it through the hole right here. And that's it. That's the bolt. Pretty long. Upper control arm is out. Now's a good time to clean all the bolts. Use like a wire brush just to clean the heads because they're dirty. So just a heads up for the driver's side, when you take out the upper control arm, the bolt, again we're on the driver's side so it's the front of the car. The bolt goes towards the front of the car. Now the bolt head will get stuck on a bracket. This bracket right here. This one. It holds this wire loom assembly. It's held on by a 10mm bolt. And it's right under the battery tray. Just take a wrench and it takes it right off. That allows room to slide the bolt out from the upper control arm. And there's the head. And then it allows you room to just keep sliding it out. And at some point you're able to slide it all the way, and then you could pull out the head from that space right there. Then once you pull out the bolt, the upper control arm should be completely free to take out, so just be mindful of that. Also, when you're working on the driver's side, the bolt may get caught up on the battery tray. It's just going to be a matter of wiggling it around back and forth. And of course, before you install the new part, just make sure the new one is exactly the same as the old one. It looks identical, which is great. If it doesn't, don't continue. So first, to install, we're just going to put this very long bolt. This is a new one. I'm just going to put it in from the front so it sits right there. So again, right here, sliding it in place, that might be a little fun. So, top hole, and it slides in. I'll leave it there for now. Just let it sit there. So, I'm gonna put the first washer on. Again, that indented side. The bulging side goes this way on this end. I'm actually going to put the control arm in there first. All right. I am just gonna put the controller, the pry bar in there, just a little support. Also, before you put the bolt all the way through, make sure this line is on top of the control arm and not under it, because it wouldn't be a good day for you. So now we're gonna go through the top and just fish the bolt through the I'm just gonna wiggle that bolt forward. Hopefully this looks good quality wise. Yeah, so it slides on top of that line right over here. Just got to wiggle it around. I can't do that with two hands, but once you get it past this little area, again, just giving this a little yank, just a slight amount, and it slides past. It's actually a little funny how easy it went, and it took like all of 3 seconds after I put the camera down. Like it fits pretty easily. Just wiggling it with the fingers. New bolt, but again, old bolt was just the threads that were a little rusted. So that's in. Washer's in. So once the washer is in at the other side, right here, so once the washer's in on the other side, whoops, pry bar came out. Put the other washer in, again, bulge facing inwards, and by inwards I mean towards the strut. So like they kind of face towards each other. When the nut goes on, just hand thread it on. Let's see. for that. That's a decent-ish angle. All right, so like before, whoops, wrench on the bolt head and 19mm socket on the nut end. This thing is in the way. Oh, it's another thing. Whoops. So something I forgot to mention is that you want this control arm to be at basically like parallel to the ground, so like right height when you're tightening it down. So that looks good. Now you can tighten it down. That's why you watch the video. Learn from my mistakes. Okay. This is fun. Now we're going to torque it down. This is 85 foot-pounds, 19mm bolt, wrench on the head, and 19mm socket on the nut. Yeah, see, if you didn't take out that little piece of hardware for the brake line, it'd be a lot harder. Double click. Cool. All right, so that's in there. Now for the fun part, because like I said, my sway bars aren't attached, so this thing moves a little more than I want it to. Hopefully you guys and ladies have a better time with that. Okay, this is a protective covering that comes off. Wiggle it around a little bit. Oh, there we go. Just want to wipe. Got grease in there. Tight from the factory. Oh, that should be good enough. Okay, so now I'm going to put a pry bar on top. I'm going to take these hooks out. You see that? Be unfortunate if you can't. Yeah. So using the floor jack makes a big difference. Oh, you can't really see that. There we go. Yeah, using the floor jack, that's as much as I have to push on it, like barely anything. So use the floor jack, support it from the bottom. I'll show you in a sec once I get this nut on. You want to thread the nut, the new one, as much as you can. Now we can take the pry bar off. So what I mean by support it with the floor jack is right here, by the control arm. So I'm replacing it, so I don't care, but that's fine weight bearing wise for this amount. It's not a lot of weight, not doing the whole car. That's on there, nice. This is a 19mm socket. I'm going to tighten that down. torque this down to 81 foot-pounds. Double click. All right. However, this nut does not line up with the hole. Just gotta make that a little tighter, not looser. There we go. Gonna put the new cotter pin through the hole. Pin it over. You're good to go. I'm just going to attach all those lines we took off from before. So let's see. Start with this one over here. Take that back. I'm starting with this one just because. So that was a 12mm bolt. Always hand thread these first. Last thing you want is to cross thread. Okay. So that one, 12mm. I'm not going to torque those down too much. I'd rather use a wrench. There's no torque spec for these. These are just tight, but not snap the head off tight. Yeah, that's good. Remember, mine for the brake line was a 13mm. Yours most likely 12 if you didn't replace it with the stainless steel bolt. I can't really see that. There we go. Next up, we got 10mm bolts. And again, I know I said this before, but I need to reiterate, please make sure this wire is not under the control arm. It should be on top like it is here. It should be free to move, not pinched up against this point. So the top bolt, again, 10mm, hand thread it. Just gonna get that 10mm socket, tighten it down. Yeah, that could be stripped easily. So that one's good. The other 10mm bolt holding this one in. Probably not the best view from there. I remember I sprayed this one in the beginning. That one does not need to come off. Oh, and don't forget the clip. This clip right here, it just gets pushed in this hole. That's it. Pushing connector, very helpful. All right, so just double check everything is good. So this one is on there, that end, this end is on there, torqued, that one's torqued. This bolt, tight, this one is tight, that connection's in, that one's tight, that one's tight. Those bolts are all good. Next up, going to reattach the sway bar links. Now again, I'm doing a bunch of other stuff, so it's going to be a day or two for me, but for you, a couple seconds. For the drivers, for that bracket underneath the battery tray, it's the battery, and that's what the bracket looks like in position. I didn't put the bolt on yet, but I'm about to. And it's a 10mm, just tighten it down, don't torque it down. It's not a big bolt. It's just a little dark, things changed. Anyways, so passenger side, we are going to take the sway bar link, put it back in the knuckle, take the nut off, just like that, thread it back on. Now this is an 18mm socket. However, if I turn this, if I use a socket on this, this part's probably going to spin. So you could use a wrench and keep it in place. But if this part right here spins, even with the wrench, like it's separated from the actual sway bar link, I'll show you the other way. So surprisingly, it didn't separate, and it actually held on, which is great. However, from the driver's side, and I think it didn't record for this, so that's why I'm showing you the passenger side too. You're gonna use this 6mm hex socket and an 18mm ratchet. So I'm gonna put the ratchet on the nut and the hex socket in the stud. So long as your sway bar link is able to do this. If you could torque it to 54 foot-pounds, go for it. With this method, you can't torque it because this socket won't fit on here. It'll just spin. I mean, on this side, yes, I can, because I could just put a wrench on here. The other side, I can't. So make it tight. Then you can put your covers back on, you know, the splash shields, these things. These are new, so got new ones. But if you're reusing them, same thing. I just put the clips in them. This one's the same on both sides of the car. This other one differs to one's front right, other is front left. So let's just attach that back on. Again, I already put them in there. And this one goes on the side, right here. So the splash shields are on now. I had to, turns out some of these connectors, the ones that came with them, weren't the best, so I had to reuse some of the ones from old one, but they work fine, so they're in, they're good. Next, for the next step now. First. Okay, you're all in. Cool. Now we're just going to hand thread the nuts on. 21 millimeter, star-shaped pattern. Now we're going to lower the car and torque them down. Alright, so again, passenger side, torque it down to 83 foot-pounds, 21 millimeter socket. Good to go with that.